Let's get right into it. Number 10. The jukebox nobody installed. Picture this. You wake up on a perfectly normal Tuesday. You haven't touched your phone yet. You haven't spoken to anyone. You haven't even fully processed the concept of being awake. And then, out of absolutely nowhere, your brain decides to play Africa by Toto at full volume. Internally. On loop. For the next 6 hours. Nobody asked for this. You didn't request it. You didn't hum it the night before. You didn't even like that song. And yet here it is, blasting from the inside of your skull like your neurons rented out the concert hall and forgot to tell you. This is called an involuntary musical imagery, or INMI. Scientists gave it a very serious name because they too were probably sitting in a research lab going absolutely insane from whatever song their brain wouldn't let go of. Studies suggest that nearly 99% of people experience this. So yes, basically everyone walking around on this planet has a tiny, unsolicited DJ spinning tracks behind their eyes, and we just collectively agreed to never talk about it. Here's the unsettling part though. The part that should make you sit up a little. When your brain plays music internally, the same auditory regions that activate when you hear real sound light up. Your auditory cortex, the part of your brain responsible for processing actual external noise, fires up like you've got headphones on, even when the room is completely silent. Your brain is essentially hallucinating music and calling it totally fine. You're not crazy, probably, but your brain is absolutely out here generating phantom concerts and logging it under normal Tuesday activity. The auditory cortex doesn't particularly care whether the sound is real or imagined. It just wants to participate. It's like that one friend who shows up to every party even when they weren't invited, and somehow nobody throws them out. The fact that almost everyone experiences this, yet almost nobody fully understands why, is either deeply comforting or deeply disturbing. Pick whichever helps you sleep at night. The music will still be playing either way. Number 9. The earworm has a real name and it's somehow worse. The word earworm sounds adorable. Harmless even. Like something you'd find in a children's book next to a friendly caterpillar. But the actual term earworm is a direct translation of the German word Ohrwurm, and once you know that, it immediately sounds more menacing. Because worms don't just sit there. They burrow. They move through things. They make themselves at home in places they were never invited. Researchers at the University of St. Andrews and earworm expert Elizabeth Helmuth Margulis have spent actual academic careers studying why certain songs latch onto your brain like a parasite in a turtleneck. And what they found is genuinely fascinating in a I wish I didn't know this kind of way. Earworms almost always follow a specific musical structure. They tend to be fast. They tend to have a narrow pitch range, meaning the notes don't jump around wildly. They tend to have unusual intervals, little melodic quirks that your brain finds interesting enough to want to replay, but simple enough that it can do it on repeat without losing its place. Think of it like a brain-friendly hook. It's not too hard to remember, not too boring to ignore. It's right in that cursed middle zone where your neurons go, oh yeah, I could do this a few more times. Lady Gaga songs, Kylie Minogue songs, songs with nonsense syllables, songs where the chorus is the same 4 words repeated 15 times with slightly different passion each time. These are statistically the most likely to lodge themselves in your temporal lobe and refuse to pay rent. What's even more unnerving is that the earworm doesn't need the full song to survive. Just a fragment, a single melodic phrase. 6 seconds of Call Me Maybe is enough for your brain to run the whole circuit on autopilot for 3 hours. You've essentially given your auditory system a snippet and it took that as a personal challenge. Basically, your brain found a catchy 4-bar loop and said, this is my personality now. Number 8. Your brain is bored, and this is its cry for help. Here's something nobody tells you in school. Your brain, the 3-pound biological supercomputer allegedly running your entire existence, gets catastrophically bored. And when it does, it doesn't just sit quietly and wait for something interesting to happen. It starts generating its own entertainment, unsolicited, without warning, like a toddler left alone in a room for too long. One of the most well-supported theories behind why earworms happen is something researchers call the default mode network, a system in your brain that kicks on whenever you're not actively focused on a task. is essentially your brain's screensaver. And instead of a bouncing DVD logo, yours apparently plays the chorus of a song you heard in a grocery store 4 days ago. Studies have found that earworms are significantly more likely to strike when you're doing something low effort and repetitive. Walking, washing dishes, folding laundry, taking a shower. Activities that keep your hands busy but leave your brain completely unemployed. The moment your prefrontal cortex clocks out and stops actively directing your attention, something has to fill the silence. And your brain, being the chaotic little gremlin it is, reaches for music. This is actually your nervous system trying to regulate itself. Music activates reward pathways. It creates predictable patterns that your brain finds satisfying to complete. So when you're bored or understimulated, your brain essentially self-medicates with a melody it already knows. It's not random. It's your neural circuitry going, "We're not being used to our full potential right now, so I'm going to play Mr. Brightside until someone gives us something better to do." The kicker? The more you try to stop thinking about the song, the louder it gets. Psychologists call this the rebound effect, the same phenomenon that happens when someone tells you not to think about a pink elephant and now that's literally all you can think about. Your brain treats suppression as a challenge. It interprets "stop playing that song" as "play that song with more conviction." So you're not just bored. You're bored, and your brain is staging a little concert specifically because you tried to cancel it. Number 7. The completion compulsion. There's a specific kind of torture that music has perfected over centuries, and it has a name. It's called the Zeigarnik Effect, and while it was originally discovered in the context of unfinished tasks, it maps onto music so perfectly that it almost feels personal. Here's the deal. Your brain has a deep, almost obsessive need to finish things. Incomplete tasks, unresolved patterns, cut-off sequences. These create a kind of low-grade mental tension that your brain desperately wants to resolve. Psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik noticed back in the 1920s that waiters could remember unpaid orders with stunning accuracy. But the moment a bill was settled, the information basically vanished from memory. The brain holds onto the unfinished. It files the completed away and forgets about it. Now apply that to music. If you hear the first half of a melody and it gets interrupted, someone turns off the radio mid-chorus, a video buffers right before the drop, a song fades out at the exact wrong moment, your brain doesn't just shrug and move on. It opens a tab. It registers that melody as an incomplete task and keeps it running in the background, quietly nudging you to finish it. That's why you sometimes catch yourself humming a song all the way through, completely on autopilot, not because you wanted to, but because your brain was technically trying to close a loop. This is also why songs that have unusual or unexpected endings tend to stick around longer. Your auditory cortex is genuinely confused about whether the job is done. It keeps replaying the melody, checking the ending each time, going, "Was that it? That felt unresolved. Let me try again." Meanwhile, you're standing in a parking lot, having a full inner concert that you didn't schedule and cannot leave. And the truly diabolical part is that songwriters know this. Hooks are engineered to feel unfinished. That little melodic lift at the end of a chorus that never quite resolves? That's not an accident. That's someone in a recording studio deliberately leaving your brain a cliffhanger and walking away laughing. Your brain isn't broken. It's just deeply, embarrassingly susceptible to the musical equivalent of a TV show that ends on a cliffhanger every single episode. Number 6. Musicians are cursed. Specifically, if you think your relationship with phantom music is bad, spare a thought for people who have dedicated their entire lives to it. Because it turns out that the more musically trained you are, the more aggressively your brain decides to torture you with involuntary playback. Which is a genuinely cruel joke when you think about it. You spend years developing a deep, intimate relationship with music, and music thanks you by haunting you with extra intensity. Studies comparing musicians to non-musicians found that people with formal musical training experience earworms more frequently, more vividly, and for longer durations. Not slightly more, significantly more. A person who can sight-read sheet music and identify a diminished seventh chord by ear is essentially walking around with a higher resolution internal sound system that their brain uses constantly and without permission. The reason for this is actually kind of elegant in a horrible way. Musical training physically changes your auditory cortex. It strengthens the neural pathways associated with sound processing, pattern recognition, and melodic memory. What this means in practice is that a trained musician's brain is exceptionally good at reconstructing music from memory. It has more detail to work with, higher fidelity, better recall of specific timbres, tempos, and harmonies. So when an earworm strikes, it doesn't just get a rough approximation of the melody. It gets the full studio version, complete with instrumentation, backing vocals, and whatever that weird synth sound is in the bridge. There's a particular phenomenon reported almost universally among professional musicians called musical dreaming, where they don't just hear music involuntarily while awake, but continue to compose, perform, and rehearse in their sleep. Paul McCartney famously woke up one morning with the entire melody of Yesterday fully formed in his head, convinced he must have heard it somewhere before because it seemed too complete to have come from a dream. He spent weeks asking people if they recognized it before accepting that his sleeping brain had just written one of the most covered songs in history. So if you're a musician reading this and wondering why your brain never shuts up, the answer is that you trained it too well. You built a concert hall inside your head and now it runs shows 24 hours a day. The rest of us are just dealing with a Bluetooth speaker that nobody can find the off switch for. Number 5. Stress gives your internal DJ a double espresso. Stress and music have a relationship that is, at best, complicated, and at worst, a complete psychological ambush. Because while music is widely known to reduce anxiety, lower cortisol, and generally make humans feel like functional beings, the inverse is also true. When you're stressed, your brain becomes dramatically more likely to get stuck on a song. And not a calming one. Never a calming one. Research published in the journal Psychology of Music found that emotional state plays a significant role in earworm frequency and intensity. Specifically, stress, fatigue, and anxiety all increase the likelihood of involuntary musical imagery. Which means that the week before a big deadline, during a rough patch in your personal life, or at 3 in the morning when your brain has decided sleep is optional, that's precisely when your internal soundtrack cranks up to full volume. The mechanism behind this is tied to how your brain processes threat and uncertainty. When your stress response activates, your brain shifts into a kind of hypervigilant pattern-seeking mode. It starts scanning for familiar, predictable structures it can hold on to. And music, especially music you've heard hundreds of times, is the ultimate predictable structure. Your brain knows exactly what comes next. It knows every beat, every word, every transition. In a world that currently feels unstable and overwhelming, a familiar song is basically a security blanket made of sound. The problem is that this backfires spectacularly. Because now you're stressed and you have Eye of the Tiger playing on loop in your head, which is simultaneously motivating and completely unhinged as a response to, say, filling out tax forms. There's also a cruel irony at work here involving sleep deprivation specifically. The more exhausted you are, the less control your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function and suppressing unwanted thoughts, has over what's running in the background. So the tireder you get, the louder and more persistent the music becomes. Your brain's security guard goes home early, and the earworm takes full advantage. Basically, your nervous system is using ABBA as a coping strategy, and it didn't even ask for your input. Number 4. The cure makes it worse. At some point, everyone who has suffered through a 3-hour internal replay of Who Let the Dogs Out has desperately Googled how to get a song out of your head. And the internet, being the internet, has offered a spectacular variety of solutions. Chew gum. Listen to the song all the way through. Replace it with another song. Think about something else. Engage in a mentally demanding task. Read a book. Go for a walk. Some of these actually have a grain of science behind them. James Calares, a consumer psychologist who has spent more time studying earworms than anyone should reasonably have to, found that engaging your brain in a moderately challenging cognitive task, something demanding enough to occupy your attention but not so intense that it becomes stressful, can interrupt the loop. Anagram puzzles work surprisingly well. Reading a gripping novel works. Anything that forces your brain to actively process new information essentially kicks the earworm out of the driver's seat and makes it sit in the back. But here's the problem with the most common advice, which is to just listen to the song all the way through. In theory, this should satisfy the Zeigarnik loop, close the unfinished task, and let your brain file the melody away. And sometimes it works. But sometimes, and this is the part that should concern you, listening to the song in full simply reloads it. With more detail, at higher volume. Your brain essentially goes, "Oh, we're doing this now? Great. Let me get a fresh copy." And now you have an earworm with better audio quality than the one you started with. The replacement strategy is equally treacherous. Swapping one song for another to dislodge an earworm is the mental equivalent of solving a spider problem by introducing a slightly less scary spider. Congratulations, you no longer have Toxic by Britney Spears in your head. You now have Happy by Pharrell Williams, and honestly it's unclear which is worse at hour 4. The genuinely uncomfortable truth is that there is no universally reliable cure. Your brain adopted this song and it will release it on its own schedule, in its own time, with complete disregard for your feelings on the matter. The best you can do is make your brain busy enough that the earworm gets bored and leaves voluntarily. Which means the most effective treatment for an involuntary internal concert is to simply be less boring. Your brain started this because it had nothing better to do. Give it something better to do. You're essentially negotiating with a toddler by offering better toys. Number 3. Your memories are hiding in the music. Here's where things get genuinely strange. And a little tender if you're in the right mood for it. Because earworms aren't always random. More often than it seems, the song your brain reaches for is connected, sometimes invisibly, sometimes painfully obviously, to something you experienced. A feeling you haven't processed. A memory you haven't visited in years. An emotion that doesn't have words yet but apparently has a backing track. Music and autobiographical memory are stored in overlapping neural systems. The hippocampus, which handles long-term memory consolidation, works in close collaboration with the auditory cortex and the limbic system, the emotional processing center of your brain. What this means practically is that a song doesn't just get stored as a melody. It gets stored alongside everything that was happening when you heard it. The smells in the room, the quality of the light, the feeling in your chest. All of it gets bundled together into one compressed emotional file, and the song is essentially the shortcut key. This is why a 15-second clip of a song you haven't thought about in a decade can suddenly drop you directly into a memory so vivid it feels like a physical location you've been teleported to. It's not nostalgia. It's your hippocampus opening a very old file. And sometimes, when your brain keeps replaying a specific song unprompted, it's not just bored. It's trying to get you to open that file. Researchers studying involuntary autobiographical memory, memories that surface without being deliberately summoned, found that music is one of the most potent retrieval cues the brain has. More reliable than smells in many cases. More immediate than photographs. A song can bypass all of your conscious filters and deliver an emotional experience directly, without asking permission, without warning, and without any particular concern for whether you were ready for it. Which explains why sometimes a song gets stuck in your head and you can't figure out why, and then 3 days later you realize it's the song that was playing the last time you saw someone you miss. Your brain knew the whole time. It just wasn't ready to tell you directly. So it played the song on loop until you figured it out yourself. Your brain is a therapist that communicates exclusively through playlist curation. And its bedside manner leaves a lot to be desired. Number 2. When the music becomes something else entirely. Everything discussed so far sits comfortably within the range of normal human experience. Annoying, bizarre, occasionally emotionally ambushing, but normal. However, there is a point on the spectrum where involuntary musical imagery stops being a quirky brain habit and becomes something significantly more unsettling. And that point has a name. It's called musical hallucination, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Musical hallucinations are distinct from earworms in one critical way. Earworms are internally recognized as internal. You know the music is coming from inside your head. You're aware it isn't real external sound, even if you can't stop it. Musical hallucinations, on the other hand, are perceived as genuinely external. People who experience them describe hearing full orchestras playing in empty rooms. Radio broadcasts with no radio. a choir performing somewhere just out of sight. And the experience is audibly indistinguishable from actually hearing those things. This condition is associated with several different causes, and the range of them is fascinating in a medically alarming way. Hearing loss is one of the most common triggers. When the auditory system is deprived of external input, as happens with age-related or noise-induced hearing loss, the brain sometimes begins generating its own sound to fill the silence. It's essentially your auditory cortex refusing to accept that the world has gone quiet, so it manufactures noise to fill the gap. The brain, it turns out, finds silence so fundamentally uncomfortable that it will hallucinate music rather than tolerate it. Certain medications can trigger it. High fevers, epilepsy, migraines, extreme sleep deprivation, temporal lobe lesions. In each case, what's happening is some disruption to the normal balance between the brain's internal sound generation and its ability to filter, suppress, and reality check that output. The filter breaks. The music comes through at full volume. And crucially, it sounds real. The deeply human part of this is that many people who experience musical hallucinations don't immediately recognize something is wrong. They spend time looking for the source of the sound, checking if a neighbor has their television on too loud, walking through the house trying to find the radio that must be playing somewhere, and finding nothing. Your brain is so committed to the bit that it will reconstruct a full symphony orchestra and present it to you as reality, just because it finds silence unacceptable. That's not a malfunction. That's dedication. Terrifying, unhinged dedication. Number 1. You are never truly in silence. And here we are, the top of the list. The part where everything comes together into one deeply unsettling realization that you will probably think about tonight when you're trying to sleep. Silence, as a human experience, is largely a myth. Not in the acoustic sense. Yes, a soundproofed room in a physics lab can achieve near-total external silence. But in the experiential sense, in the lived, first-person sense of what it actually feels like to be inside a human mind, silence doesn't really exist. Because your brain is always generating something. Always producing internal sound, internal music, internal noise. The moment external auditory input drops below a certain threshold, your auditory cortex picks up the slack and starts filling in the gaps with whatever it has on file. John Cage, the avant-garde composer who famously wrote a piece called 4 foot 33 inch, which is literally 4 minutes and 33 seconds of performed silence, understood this intuitively. His whole point was that there is no silence. There is only what the audience brings to the quiet. And what audiences apparently brought every single time the piece was performed was the sound of their own discomfort. Their shuffling, their breathing, the music in their heads. Your brain's inability to tolerate silence is a feature, not a bug. Humans evolved in environments full of sound. Silence in nature often meant something was wrong. A predator nearby, the birds having gone suddenly quiet, the forest holding its breath before something happened. Your auditory system learned over millennia to stay on, to keep listening, to fill quiet with information rather than accept the void. The music in your head is, in its strangest and most fundamental sense, evidence that your brain refuses to stop working even when there's nothing to work on. It is restless in the most human possible way. It reaches for pattern, for melody, for something familiar and predictable and emotionally resonant, because that is what brains do. They make meaning. They construct experience. They refuse to sit in an empty room without furnishing it. You don't just hear music involuntarily because your brain is glitchy or easily distracted or slightly unhinged, though it is all of those things. You hear it because your brain is relentlessly, compulsively alive. Because the same neural machinery that lets you feel moved by a song, transported by a melody, or emotionally devastated by a chord progression, that same machinery never fully clocks out. The music in your head isn't noise. It's proof that your brain is always, on some level, reaching for beauty. Even on a boring Tuesday. Even at 3 in the morning. Even when absolutely nobody asked for Africa by Toto. Especially then, actually. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.